Okay, welcome everybody. This my name is Agnieszka Kościańska, and I'm a co-investigator on a gender war project together with Nicolette Makowicki, who's also here. And before we start, let me just say that this event is a part of Arts and Humanities Research Council funded research network Gender Wars East and South, which brings together an interdisciplinary network of scholars and artists of gender and sexuality across Latin America and Central Eastern Europe to examine the link between history, religion, sexuality, and gender under contemporary authoritarianism. Gender Wars East and South aims to document the similarities, differences, and connections between anti-gender movements across the two regions, Latin America and Eastern Europe. So today, our host is Hadley Renkin from Central European University, and I will hand it over to him to introduce our wonderful guests.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Agnieszka. Yeah, so this gender wars roundtable is at CEU, and the topic is tracing the role of global networks and actors on the emergence of Latin American and Eastern European gender wars. And I think we all know that the past decade, or really now, I think it's getting to be more than a past decade, sadly, has seen an incredible backlash against women's and queer rights all around the globe, attempts to curtail women's reproductive rights, backlash against feminism and non-heteronormative identities. These have been as powerful in many, many places, almost all places around the planet, sadly, and I think they've been particularly recognized as and particularly influential in Central and Eastern Europe and Latin America. And the idea of the project is to think about connections and relationships, similarities and differences between these, and the ways in which these sorts of campaigns have been tied together, have converged and diverged, and to explore links between different aspects and different groups. The particular event today it's titled Tracing the Role of Networks and Actors on the Emergence of Latin American and Eastern European Gender Wars. But because of Central Eastern European universities' particular regional identity, even though we're now in Vienna, the roundtable today is mostly going to focus primarily on Central Eastern European gender wars, although given the nature, what we all know about the nature of these kinds of wars and these kinds of campaigns, and given the project's core interest in tracing these sorts of connections, I'm sure that we will spend quite a lot of time about thinking about connections between the regions. Nonetheless, manifestations elsewhere, travels from and to different places. Let me just introduce our roundtable presenters or panelists today. Dorottya Redai is Executive Director of the Labrisz Leszbikus Egyesület in Budapest, Hungary, the Labrisz Lesbian Association, and formerly a research fellow at Central CEU's Democracy Institute and Center for Policy Studies, and a faculty member of the Gender Studies Department at CEU. Someone has an unmuted mic. Perhaps they could mute it, please. Thanks. Roman Kuhar is Professor of Sociology at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. Dorottya Szikra is a visiting professor at the Department of Gender Studies at CEU and Senior Research Fellow in the Research Department for Social and Public Policy at the Center for Social Sciences Institute for Sociology in Budapest, Hungary. I am assistant professor in the Department of Gender Studies at CEU, and I'll be moderating and kind of framing the issue. And what I'll just sketch out the structure of this for everyone. What I wanted to start out with was just posing some very broad general thoughts for our three roundtable participants, for each of them to address in roughly 5 minutes or so, to just think about, not really to answer because they're much too broad and there are too many of them, but just to sort of throw out some thoughts of their own that they think are most relevant for framing this set of issues. And then I was thinking something like half an hour of 20 minutes, half an hour of discussion between the members of the roundtable, responding to each other's thoughts, having a conversation about this. And then with the time that we have remaining, opening things up to the audience for questions, for comparisons, and for other thoughts. So when we get to that point, please, raise a virtual hand. And thanks so much for being here. So I'm just, Dorottya, Dori, and Roman, I'm just going to throw these thoughts out for you to then just sort of pick up or not as you choose. These are the things that strike me as really important and interesting about this. Some of them are totally obvious and maybe some of them less so. What I'd like you to think about are questions like, who are the key actors and voices in the anti-gender movement or movements in your country? What are the key sites, internal and external, that you see to be most impacting these kinds of movements and their politics? What are the most important connections and disconnections that are currently in play or that have been in play in the past? And what do you think that in your country, the movement's key modalities have been? What are the techniques and what are the levels on which it functions? Also, what are some of the key ways in which your country's post-socialist or socialist or pre-socialist experience has influenced some of the broader social perceptions of gender and sexuality that underlie current struggles over gender ideology? How have particular tensions or conjunctions between national and transnational forms of identity, belonging, and politics, whether gender or sexual or other, how have these shaped the connections and disconnections of anti-gender movements in your country or in the Central and Eastern European region? What do you think the possibilities are for how these continue to impact these movements in the near future? And then finally, what do you think, or who do you think are the key actors or forces resisting anti-gender movements in your country and in our region? What are their connections, and how can our scholarly analysis of these issues help them? All right, thank you. So again, just a few thoughts, roughly 5 minutes or so each. Dorottya, would you like to begin? No, I mean, go ahead. I mean Dorottya Szikra rather than
I'd be happy
Dori.
to have Dori first, if you don't mind.
Dori, is that okay with you?
Yeah, Dorottya, the other Dorottya. If you don't, I can go, but yeah, I'd be happy to. And I bring over a book that I wanted to show. So I go after Dori, if you don't mind.
Dori, is that okay with you?
Okay, I didn't want to be the first one, but it's okay. So,
Okay.
and I don't think I'll answer all the or respond to all the points, because I know that Dorottya is more of an expert on some of it than I am. So the first question was about who are the key actors and key sites in Hungary. When this movement started to get strong, it became clear that it's especially strong in Hungary because the key actor is the government. So unlike in other countries, it is the government, and not accidentally, this government is trying to establish a non-democratic or autocratic regime, and the anti-gender, anti-LGBT movement is a very strong pillar of this. And the key sites, I think this is very interesting, and it would be good to have a conversation about this with Dorka. So, like, why why is it in Hungary? Why is it focusing more on LGBTQI enemies than women as the enemies or the target of these anti-gender politics? Why is that direction stronger? Because at the moment, or more visible, because under the carpet, there are things happening also in women's policies, but they are somehow not so vocal, not so visible, not so powerful, or not so strong as the policies and rhetoric against LGBTQI people. So I would be very interested to hear your views on why this may be the case, Dorka. And connected to this is the resistance, which is again a long story of why the women's movement is not really strong in Hungary, unlike in Poland, for example. And why is it that even though the major target of the anti-gender movement is, at least at the moment, is the LGBTQI community, how come that these organizations are getting stronger and more resistant? Or is it, so is it the reason why, or is it, a consequence, or how is this happening? That's also very interesting, I think. Let me just, and the key site, if I understand correctly how you mean site, is legislation. So not only, there's very strong propaganda and rhetoric, anti-LGBTQI rhetoric, but there's also very strong legislative actions. And this is a trick of the legal autocracies, that the government is elected by elected through so-called democratic elections, which, if we go into it, it turns out that they are not so democratic, but apparently democratic, even though biased elections. So the government gets legally entitled to create laws and measures to assert their power and to introduce these anti-LGBTI measures. So I would say that legislation is the most important site for the struggle. What else do I want to say anything about? Yeah, one thing connected to the resistance is, as an activist, I see that there's quite a strong divide between women's organizations. Many, not all of them, of course, but many of the women's organizations, those who have existed for a long time and are stronger, bigger, and the LGBTQI movement. There is a so there's quite a strong transphobic attitude in some of these bigger women's organizations, and a kind of, it seems there is a kind of frustration claiming that the LGBTQI movement takes away the attention from the women's movement and takes away the resources as well, and that there is competition for resources. And And so sometimes the LGBTQI movement even gets accused by actors in the women's movement of kind of stealing the issue, the gender issue, which is also connected to how gender is defined. So there are big, debates about what gender actually means and which aspects. So there's a claim by the women's movement that the gender identity aspect of gender is too strong, and it takes away attention from gender inequalities, for example, inequalities between women and men. That means for them. So yeah, this is what I would say as a first round, and then we will, I think,
Okay, great.
sure
Thank
we
you.
will discuss this more.
Yes, definitely. Thanks very much, Dori. Dorottya, do you want to
Yes, and thank you, Dori,
continue?
for taking the role of the first speaker from me. That helped a lot, because I wanted to show you two books. The second just came to my mind, because what I will tell you is based on our research that I and my colleagues, we have done recently. So the first one, and that I will tell you exactly what I want to share with you about that. The first one is this book. We co-authored it with Christina Rath from Babes-Bolyai University in Romania, Tomas Inglot from Minnesota State University, and myself. It's been 10 years of work, and it's entitled Mothers, Families, or Children, Family Policy in Poland, Hungary, and Romania between 1945 and 2020. Came out with Pittsburgh University Press last year. And the second one, for which I just ran out to the other room, is a Hungarian edited volume that I edited with Anna Fejős, entitled in Hungarian Támogatás és támadás női civil szervezetek az illiberális demokráciában, meaning sticks and carrots, women's organizations under an illiberal democracy. And this book, this latter one, is only in Hungarian up to now, but I really hope to have at least a scientific article out of it, because it's a really thorough qualitative research into the Hungarian women's and family-related organizations, including the right-wing ones, left-wing ones, feminist ones, and also the far right. So this is where I get my knowledge from when I talk about the questions that you raised. Actually, the English version of this book is a very short English version is available at the homepage of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, women's organizations in Hungary, or something like this. If you type that, you will find it, or I will try to do that. I will try to include that in the chat, right, when I'm not talking anymore. Okay, so then maybe a couple of words about joining Dori and the questions she raised, and then I turn to my focus here, because I thought I will not be able to answer all these questions, but I decided to focus on the supranational level, supranational organizations, and how these are connected to various, to the anti-gender movement in Hungary. I'm not an expert in this. I'm an expert in more in family policies and the actors around family policies, but now also, given this research, I know something about women's organizations in Hungary. So yeah, reflecting to Dori's what you raised, I also think that in Hungary the anti-gender war is about the LGBTQ issue. And the Hungarian, together with the Polish government, make it absolutely clear when they discussed this on the EU level, not the current Polish government, but the previous, of course, the PiS government, they joined forces, Fidesz and PiS joined forces to push the anti-gender issue and the pro-family issue on the EU agenda. And when they did so, they started to veto all legislation, EU level legislation, that included
Recording in progress.
Okay. That included the word gender. And they explained it several times that they did so to negate LGBTQ propaganda, so to say. Whenever these words were changed to women and men, or more about, if it's more about the heteronormative way of understanding genders, they were kind of okay with it. They could then accept some of the legislation they attacked on the first place. So I absolutely agree that it is anti-LGBTQ. The site of this battle is, on the first hand, it's discursive, but yes, there have been very strong legislative pieces in Hungary, as probably all of you know, but different than, for instance, in Poland. In Poland, it's about women's bodies, it's about abortion, whereas in Hungary, it was about LGBTQ, anything that has to do with non-heterosexual behavior, not even, cohabitants or anything. It really is about, propaganda, homosexual propaganda, is that what they call it. And in Hungary, as you may know, this legislation was kind of imported from Russia. 2013 legislation in Russia, or yeah, I think it's 2013. But anyway, the Hungarian piece seems to be stricter than the Russian one, and is actually now spreading around in various spaces in Hungary, particularly into cultural spaces. Just recently, the WordPress photo exhibition was supposed to be closed because it was against this legislation, because it depicted a lesbian, I think, elderly home, was it? And then the head of the museum resigned. And in other cases, bookshops have to cover their supposedly homosexual content, or even sexual content, and not let young people enter the bookshops. So I mean, there is, and Dori would know more about this, I think. So so this is spreading around, and it really puts the Hungarian LGBTQ community in a very fragile situation. So yeah, that's the reflection. And I'm sorry if I was long. Then I try to squeeze in what I wanted to say about supranational organizations. So in our book with Tomáš Inglet and Kristina Rath, we differentiate 3 types of policy orientations in welfare states regarding family policies. One of them would be child orientation, the other one would be women or mother orientation, and the third one, which I want to say a few words about, is family orientation. And this one is present in Hungary, and actually it is present also in historically. The development of the welfare state is focused on pronatalism and on the family as a unit, and that the state has this task of maintaining and helping this so-called traditional family. And in countries where this is the case, where this traditional family is in the focus of policies and discourses historically, in these countries, the EU agendas of gender equality or social inclusion, EU level agendas, are not so welcome as in other countries with different focus. So because the child orientation would match the social inclusion agenda, the women orientation would match the gender equality agenda and also the reconciliation agenda of the EU. So in countries like Hungary, this traditional family focus together with the demographic emergency focus would clash with the EU agendas. Why I'm saying this? It's because it made it very easy or kind of natural for the Hungarian government to resist the agenda. And for instance, in 2011, and we'll see what will happen now with the Hungarian presidency, they could say, we are not organizing anything that has to do with gender equality, but rather we focus on family mainstreaming. So instead of gender mainstreaming, we want family mainstreaming. And this is something they already propagated in 2011. And then the Polish government, after 2016, they also kind of joined into this way. And the final point I want to make is that the EU, with promoting various types of networks, it also promotes conservative networks, including the Large Families Association, large families, European large families, where did I put it? I'm not sure if it's an association, but EU level NGOs, EU level conservative NGOs, and organized, it's called ALFAC, you know, this Large Families Association on the EU level, and also promoted the so-called family platform. That was a platform of various civil society organizations, including the right-wing and even far-right ones, to meet each other and to network. And we found in our research that this kind of networking on the EU level and EU level conservative NGOs strengthened the national actors in their traditionalist agendas, to push that agenda. And finally, we found in this research, in the civil society research, the central role of online platforms like Citizen Go that organized, as far as we know from our interviews, but you may be more knowledgeable on that, these were Spanish or based in Spain, the Citizen Go initiative, and widely utilized by far-right actors to initiate various anti-gender initiatives. So, well, that's my initial thoughts.
Hey, great. Thank you, Dorottya. Roman.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and for this invitation. I'm a bit sorry that we are not in Budapest, because that would be a good excuse for me to come to Budapest, which I love and like. Although I know Budapest from 20 years ago, I know things have changed on a political level primarily. I could continue where Dorothy finished with this Citizen Go platform, which operates in 12 languages and so forth, but I will focus rather on what I have prepared on Slovenia, and then maybe we can discuss later these transnational connections. I have a few slides which will help you and me probably follow what I'm trying to say, but just let me say that like in Hungary, LGBTIQ issues and particularly marriage equality debate was the trigger for the emergence of the anti-gender mobilization in Slovenia around 2010, 2009, when the new family code was proposed for the first time, which introduced marriage equality. Now, I want to be a little bit provocative in these first 5 minutes, and I would like to turn my attention slightly into a different direction. Most of the studies and most of what we talk about on anti-gender mobilization, and rightly so, is about the negative effects of these mobilizations and how these mobilizations constrain democratic processes and so forth. But I would like to ask myself, and in that way, I'm sorry, a little bit avoid your questions right now. What if there are any political opportunities that the anti-gender mobilizations offer in what they are doing? Now, again, I would like to stress, in no way I would like to endorse anti-gender mobilization, and in no way my message is that something good can come out of these mobilizations. But I think that the specific Slovenian case, I'm not trying to generalize it in any way, shows that besides all the very negative outcomes of the anti-gender mobilizations, these mobilizations also created several political opportunities which the Slovenian LGBT, but also the feminist organizations and mobilizations took advantage of. And I would say that partly there are different elements to it, but partly the fact that Slovenia is now the first Eastern European country to adopt full marriage equality in 2022 is because of the way these mobilizations, the anti-gender mobilizations, worked, and the effects that these mobilizations had on the Slovenian political and cultural context. So basically, I'm saying that these resistances and backlash might create political opportunities. Now, to not to be too long, the whole story about marriage equality in Slovenia is very complicated, and I'm not going to go into any details. For what I guess for the basic understanding, we need to know that Slovenian parliament adopted marriage equality law twice, and it was two times rejected on a referendum, which was started by the anti-gender organizations in Slovenia. The anti-gender organizations in Slovenia first presented themselves as a group of concerned, silenced citizens. So they presented themselves as not being religious, as not being part of any political party, unlike in Hungary, where the anti-gender ideology is part of the official ideology. That was not the case in Slovenia, although it became clear very soon that they are very closely connected to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, in order for marriage equality to be adopted at the end in 2022, the Slovenian LGBT movement had to go through these 8 draft bills of different versions of marriage equality, 4 adopted acts, 2 referendum, 1 Supreme Court decision, 1 district court decision, and 6 constitutional court decisions. So it wasn't, a very straightforward path. But in 2012, as you can see, the anti-gender movement entered this debate, although they were present already a little bit before, but they were not yet framing their arguments as gender ideology, or in Slovenia, they even don't say gender ideology, they rather talk about gender theory as a hidden plan of radical feminists and radical LGBT activists and so forth. So what are the political opportunities that came out of the anti-gender mobilization? I claim that there are at least 3 levels of opportunities that emerged, and eventually the Slovenian LGBT organizations took advantage of. The first one is on a political level, because the left-wing political parties were on a declarative level supporting LGBT movement from 90s onwards. This heavy anti-gender backlash created a situation which put some pressure on the left-wing political parties to finally do something about rights of LGBT community, particularly in relation to civil partnership or some form of registered partnership and so forth. So we can see this. No, this is too much details. So political level is definitely one level where the political opportunities emerge. The second one is connected to representations. Because the anti-gender actors were very active, the issue of marriage equality was in the focus of media attention for over 10 years. It is really, really hard to keep such attention for a certain social issue for such a long time. But because the anti-gender mobilizations were quite strong, these organizations were very active, they were organizing very different events and protests and so forth, the media, of course, followed these mobilizations, and because of that, it also created a space for LGBT organizations and for LGBT people in general to say something about it. And of course, I have to stress that the majority of Slovenian media outlets were, supporting the LGBT cause, were supporting full marriage equality. So what we have seen here is the change from only LGBT activists talking about these issues to this issue becoming discussed by ordinary people, by mothers whose son is gay, or by same-sex family and so forth. In that sense, I would say that these mobilizations, because they were becoming more and more radical, pushed some people into media, and they decided to come out and to tell their story, to react to these anti-gender mobilizations. And this is actually the third level also of the political opportunities, the mobilization level. Radicalization of anti-gender mobilizations led to broader networks of alliances, because it became clear to the feminist movement and to the LGBTIQ movement that this particular case of marriage equality is not only about marriage equality, but it is rather a broader issue of human rights, of how human rights are used and abused in political debates and so forth. So in that sense, we have seen some broader networks, collaborations between these organizations, unlike I hear now in Hungary, where the feminist and LGBT actors are competing among each other. In Slovenia, I would say it was rather the other way around. As a reaction to the anti-gender mobilizations, they stood together, they are still standing together. New ways of organizations are coming to the forefront because of the anti-gender mobilizations. And at the very end, we have also seen political mobilization of non-activist same-sex couples, because the LGBT community in Slovenia was a bit reluctant to put a complaint to the Constitutional Court about marriage equality, claiming that, according to Slovenian constitution, same-sex couples should enjoy equal rights to heterosexual couples. They were reluctant to do that because they knew that if the Constitutional Court says no, then this is the end of the story. Because once you have a negative decision by the Constitutional Court, then really reduces the space for political activities. But ordinary same-sex couples, I don't know how to put it otherwise, so people who were never part of the activist network, because of what the anti-gender actors were doing, were really frustrated. And one of them, a couple, both of them are lawyers, filed a complaint to the Constitutional Court without any, action being organized together with the LGBT community. They filed it personally, and eventually that led to the marriage equality, which was adopted last year. What is also interesting, if we take a look at the public opinion polls, which are measuring the social distance towards well, they use the term homosexuals here, but LGBT community, we can say very generally, we can see that from the 90s, when over 60% of Slovenian citizens would not like a homosexual to be their neighbor, now this is 20% last year, but we have seen a drop or shortening of social distance throughout these 10 years. So despite this anti-gender mobilization, and despite the fact that they have succeeded in calling for a referendum twice and winning the referendum twice and mobilizing a lot of people, but this is just part of the society. It's not, the movable middle, let me put it that way. So they have strengthened, I would say, the radical part of the community or the society, but not the movable middle. And here you can see that the social distance has been shortening despite this very aggressive anti-gender mobilization. So what is also interesting, and I will finish with this, is that the Constitutional Court decision from last year, which introduced full marriage equality, including same-sex adoption rights, referred to anti-gender mobilization in their official statement. So there was a very clear message to these people that what they are doing is not in line with the Slovenian constitution, and it's not in line with this strategic litigation strategy that they use, trying to find different legal ways around laws that are adopted or are about to be adopted. This is what they wrote in the Constitutional Court decision. Some proponents of so-called traditional marriage and family, and these are the anti-gender actors, believe that our decision will take something away from those who live in such unions and families, or that it will change their status. This is really hard to understand. They can marry and live in the way that suits them without anyone telling them what is right and wrong in their family or sex life. If they believe it is only natural and right to marry a partner of the opposite sex, they can do so. If they believe that psychologically healthy children can only be raised in traditional families, then they should do so. Allowing same-sex couples to do the same makes them no less husbands and wives and no less mothers and fathers to their children. I'm pretty much sure that the Constitutional Court would not put something like that into their decision hadn't we had this very strong anti-gender mobilization in Slovenia. So to conclude, I can say that yes, anti-gender mobilizations facilitated a lot of violence against LGBT people and other social groups, particularly women, and in the last period, transgender people. Anti-gender rhetoric is still a very powerful mobilizing tool, but the anti-gender movement has created political opportunities that led to positive outcomes for LGBT community in Slovenia. And then at the end, what if there were no anti-gender mobilization in Slovenia? This is, a little bit of a guessing game, but I would say that most likely the civil partnership law would be adopted earlier, but it wouldn't be full marriage equality because even the left-wing parties were not agitating for full marriage equality for a very long time. So there would be a civil partnership legislation. A certain amount of rights would be granted, I would say, but it would be probably very, very hard to create another political momentum to then fight for full marriage equality. So in this sense, ironically, and I guess, again, I don't want to say that it is thanks to anti-gender mobilization, but it is partly because of these mobilizations that now Slovenia has full marriage equality in place as the first Eastern European country in the world. Yeah. Okay, that's it for the first 5 minutes, which were probably 5 minutes. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks very much, Roman. So, okay, let's thank you all for your thoughts there, and let's just try to use now this is an opportunity to get a little conversation going. So, based upon what the three of you said, maybe you can pick up on one another's points. ask each other some questions or expand in response. So one issue that we had that people seem to share and be interested in was this question of resistance and how it's perhaps stimulated by or not by the anti-gender movements. There's also this question of the international connections that Dorottya, you brought up about Citizen Go and these connections to Spain and who is using them. But any other thoughts that anyone else wants to pick up from anyone else? Let's just talk about that, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. We'll see how it goes. And then we can open it up to the audience. So if anyone wants to respond to what the others said.
If I may start,
Sure.
I would like to reflect on 2 points. The one that was mentioned by Dorka, that the anti-LGBTQI politics is moving to the field of sorry, to the field of culture. I think that's quite a recent and very important direction, and also and that's what connects what I want to say to what Roman was saying, because there are certainly opportunities in the Hungarian LGBTQI activist scene, which were sort of, well, indirectly created or pushed by the anti-LGBTQI politics. So it is very obvious that all the LGBTQI activist groups, organizations have significantly grown in the past few years, grown in the fight, in the struggle, and of course it's also a question of funding. There's like funding has just multiplied in the past few years, but one of the big differences in comparison to Slovenia is that Hungary doesn't function as a democracy in any sense. Therefore, democratic political lobbying or advocacy doesn't work. It just doesn't work anymore. Organizations, activists cannot do political lobbying. It's useless, it's pointless. So there have to be other ways and to change. So other levels and other ways. What we can do is try to influence public opinion. And one of the fields where we can try to do that is culture. And this is something that, like in Labrisz, this was not our original idea, but something that we understood through what happened to one of our projects in the past 3 years, which was the publication of a fairy tale book, which included diverse characters, some of them LGBTQI people, and it grew into a sort of a resistant movement, which was influencing people through culture. So something that we can do, and now we are trying to do, is think about ways of trying to change public opinion through cultural means. Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to just bring in.
Thanks, Dorottya.
Thank you very much for your presentation on Slovenia. I was really struck by this story, and I also started to think about what if the Hungarian broadly feminist, more narrowly LGBTQ movement would have been stronger at the point when Hungarian democracy was not as damaged as today. So because the anti-gender movement appeared quite late in Hungary, surprisingly late, actually, in 2015-16. I remember an expert and me going to the Czech Republic by train in 2014. And we discussed how in all the other countries, including Slovakia or the Czech Republic, the anti-LGBTQ movement was joined forces, the Catholic Church, and they had huge marches on the streets and all that. And by that time, the Hungarian government was still not doing that. They did not have that propaganda. And she said, this expert, it's gonna come. I'm pretty sure it will reach Hungary. And it really did so in 2016-17, coming from the far right. And as soon as it entered the country, so to say, as soon as the far right started to mobilize in disruptive ways, the government picked it up and initiated its own anti-gender propaganda, actually in conjunction with the attack against the Central European University and academic freedom. So in 2017 and 18. So this is when all that started, quite late. And by that time, Hungarian democracy was indeed in a very bad shape. We did not anymore have an independent constitutional court. It was already filled with loyalists to the government, whereas back in 2011 or even 12, there was still a kind of independent constitutional court, although Fidesz was smart enough to not only to ban the rights of the constitutional court by 2012, but also initiate a new constitution, but which already defined the family in a narrow way. So there was a constitution in place that prevented that kind of mobilization. I mean, there could have been a mobilization, but it would be unconstitutional since 2012 to claim, for instance, homosexual marriage in Hungary. So they acted really quickly, and even before the anti-gender movement got, space and representation in the country. And then very recently, of course, during COVID, they added into the constitution, just to be on the safe side, that a mother is a woman and the father is a man, to completely ban any possibilities of non-heterosexual couples adopting children. So yes, it's quite a tragic story, actually, how the complete dismantling of Hungarian democracy intersected in time with the appearance of the anti-gender movement. And this was coupled with the quite fragmented nature of the Hungarian women's movement and women's organizations that was mentioned by Dori. And maybe a final word on that, or research into the civil society organizations has shown exactly what Dori just mentioned, and that is the deepening of the cleavages between women's organizations. So the government not only achieved to stop the opportunities in entering the political space and influencing any policies, but it also achieved that these organizations find it now increasingly difficult to join forces. There are some good news, though, which I'd be happy to share with you in the end, but but overall the picture is really, really dark.
Can I just add something? I think that what you said, that it's increasingly difficult to join forces, is kind of also because it's so this is a very, very one-sided thing. So I know that we in Labrisz, as a lesbian feminist organization consisting of women, we are always expected to join causes, to go marching on the violence against women's march, which we usually do. We are sort of expected by the women's organization to be there, because we are also considered to be a women's organization when, you know, when there's a reason. So it's also a question of positionality and how they position us. It's a very many of the leading LGBTQI activists, many of them are women in Hungary. We are very offended that that the women's movement had nothing to say when the so-called child protection law was introduced, which banned the promotion of homosexuality and gender transition in schools and in advertisements and in the media. So expectations are not really balanced on the two sides, and then intersectionality somehow it just doesn't exist. They don't really. I have the feeling that they don't really know what to do with a non-heterosexual women's organization. So the Hungarian women's movement seems to be a heterosexual women's movement, and this is a problem, I think, and a difficult position for them as well to move from. Yeah.
If I can add something to this, well, first of all, whenever I'm talking about this particular story with marriage equality in Slovenia, I am a little bit reluctant to tell the story because it definitely, if we only take a look at this story, it creates an impression which is a wrong impression, that the anti-gender mobilization is not devastating and it doesn't have really negative effects on several issues. Not only LGBTIQ, but reproductive rights particularly is now the new target of the anti-gender mobilizations in Slovenia. But this particular story was possible also because, at least to a certain extent, the institutions of democracy in Slovenia are still functioning. They are not functioning perfectly. There are, of course, different problems with that, but at least to a certain extent, the rule of law, the functioning of the constitutional court, and we don't have a political party in the parliament which would have the power to change the constitution, like in Hungary. I mean, I think this is really important to stress out, that these are two totally different situations. And I don't know to what extent is known, but Slovenia was directing towards the Hungarian scenario, because the previous prime minister is a good buddy, and I should say buddy, of Orban, and there's a lot of Hungarian money now in some of the media outlets, which are basically the media outlets of one political party. But on the other hand, they failed. They have succeeded for a while to take control of the national radio and particularly television. But luckily, the civil society, which is in Slovenia turning towards left, I would say, reacted soon enough, and a new law was adopted and so forth. It's complicated story, but so the Slovenia was heading towards the Hungarian scenario, what saved us was the political system that we have in terms of elections, because we always have to have these coalition governments, and there can't be one party that can really change the constitution, because you need 2/3 of votes and so forth and so forth. In connection to this, maybe I should bring in the reproductive rights issue, which the anti-gender mobilization is now targeting. But what they are doing, and I would agree with this idea of anti-gender mobilizations moving towards culture or working on norms and values, because they are working in the long how do you say, in the long term. They have all the time in the world. They know that they cannot change some things overnight, but they are imposing some ideas like human rights of unborn child. They are using, sometimes, very strategically, some legal terms, in order to present these ideas. For example, it's a complicated story, but if a child is not yet born, but the woman is pregnant and her partner dies before the child is born, this child, who was not yet born but eventually will be born in a few months, right, or weeks or whatever, has the right to inherit by this father who's not alive anymore. So they turn this legal situation in order to claim that the Slovenian legal system already recognizes unborn child who has the right to inheritance, right? And so forth. So this is the strategic litigation I was talking about. But on the other hand, thanks to very, very smart, and I cannot say enough how smart the feminist movement in the late 80s and early 90s was in Slovenia. Thanks to them, Slovenia is one of the few countries where the abortion right is inscribed into the constitution. Article 55 says that you can choose about having children or not freely, or something like that. So in order to take away the adoption right, you have to change the constitution, which for now at least it's really hard or impossible. But what their tactic is, and this is where the culture comes in, at least that's how I understood your argument, they are constantly opening up this issue. They are putting forward the ideas of unborn children having human rights. They are framing everything within human rights. They are framing everything within the right to expression, because they organized these installations, so to speak, where they blow up balloons, and each balloon represents, I don't know, 100 aborted fetuses, and so forth and so forth. So in a long run, they are working on creating the political and cultural situation, which would eventually, in a right moment, open up political opportunity to change the law, or to at least limit the right, or to and so forth. So these are the strategies that they use, and they are very patient in that sense. They are working in a long run. It's not like we need something tomorrow, but it's small step, small step, small step. And just the last sentence, because I know that one of the questions was about these transnational connections, and one of the two Dorottys already mentioned that, but we shouldn't not mention the World Congress of Families, which is one such transnational organization, which is promoting all these ideas, which is promoting, and it is a learning hub for anti-gender actors in Europe and around the globe, in terms of strategies, in terms of language, in terms of what works, what doesn't work. Then Citizen Go was already mentioned. We have European Center for Law and Justice, European Dignity Watch. These are all lobbying institutions right now, working in Brussels and Strasbourg, and some of the members of these organizations are already part of the working groups and different boards on EU level, and step by step, they are trying to impose or trying to limit or trying to reframe, different ideas. What is interesting and what is challenging is that they are using human rights discourse, they are using democratic tools like citizens initiative. That Mom and Kids was one of these kind of initiative. If you collect 1 million signatures, I think the European Parliament has to discuss your proposal and so forth. So they are using democratic tools that exist. They are using democratic concepts like human rights for non-democratic goals. And this is the new situation with which we are faced with.
Indeed. Yeah, they're also using colonial sort of structures and processes to claim that they're fighting against colonial structures and processes, right? So much has been inverted. Maybe because I think our time is starting to become slightly limited, and possibly people are tired. Maybe we could open this up to people who are still in the audience. If anyone has questions or thoughts to raise here, I see Agnieszka, you do. But if anyone else has thoughts as well, please raise a virtual hand or show up in your picture and raise a non-virtual hand, and maybe you can ask some questions or follow up on these. Agnieszka, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you so much. That was a wonderful panel, and I have two comments slash questions, and maybe more comments from Poland. So I think and of course one thing is about women's rights versus LGBTQ rights, and gender ideology versus LGBT ideology, as it is called here. So I think, although it might seem that the major struggle here is around abortion, but I think there, for last more than 10 years, there was really a lot around LGBTQ rights, and also a lot of attacks on LGBTQ communities. And I think that was also, and even during the presidential election of 2020, one of the candidates, the one who won, used extensively the term LGBT ideology as this new form of gender ideology. So I think that this is also very very visible. So that's one thing. But the other thing I wanted to say also from the Polish perspective is, building on what Roman suggested, that there are certain positive aspect, not necessarily positive, but we can see some kind of unintended consequences on those anti-gender actions. I think you can observe this the similar dynamics in Poland, especially now after the election, but also even earlier. This is what I saw in my own research on Catholicism and abortion, that a lot of really deeply religious Catholics at certain point decided, no, I mean, abortion should be legal. If we don't want people to have an abortion, we need to, discourage them in other ways through, I don't know, social support, sex education, and so on, but not through prohibitions. And the same I can see through various projects in which my students are involved regarding LGBTQ rights, that are in which there. What I can see is that those issues are being more and more moved into the mainstream. That some kind of liberal mainstream, which a few years ago had no clue why same-sex marriage would be something important. Now they start to understand, yes, that this is something we should really aim at. So I think that so hopefully this is also like a transregional process, and maybe Slovenia, it's a kind of model for all of us to to follow. Thank you. But thank you so much for this. So it wasn't really a question, but and I think of course that Hungary it's in a much worse position now. Yeah, Hadley, go ahead because it wasn't a question.
No, that's okay. I think comments are fine, and comparisons are really useful and important. I just again wanted to make an offer to the members of the so-called audience. If anyone else wants to comment or contribute, we'd be really happy to hear from you. If not, Dorottya, Dori, Roman, if anyone wants to respond or raise other questions, thoughts.
If I can just very briefly react to Agnieszka, thank you very much for pointing these cases. I know of some women who went to the church and went out in the middle of the mass in protests, right? So these kind of reactions were started with this anti-gender mobilization. So maybe I'm not suggesting we should focus only on these cases, because you know what both Dorottys are explaining, it is the real situation, but there is also the other side, a slightly more bright side. I think what the turning point in Slovenia in terms of anti-gender mobilization was, at least for, you know, again, this movable middle, or, you know, the mainstream, or I don't know how to call this part of society, is when the true colors of the anti-gender mobilizations became clear. Because at the beginning, they were really successful in creating the image of concerned citizens or concerned parents. You know, I'm concerned about the future of my child, and so forth and so forth. But then slowly but surely, it became clear that they are financed and closely connected to the Roman Catholic Church, which in Slovenia doesn't have a very positive public image. And that's also one of the reasons why the church was not in the forefront of the anti-gender mobilizations. But they made a very funny mistake, because they set up the website of this anti-gender organization, which was hosted by the official server of the Roman Catholic Church. So yeah, sure, there's no connection. And then secondly, they became very close to Janša's government, to this Slovenian Orban, so the Slovenian version of the Orban political party. And in that sense, you know, they became more politicized, and these true colors came to the forefront. And I guess that's also why some people realize that they are not what they are saying to be. They are just, you know, part of the right-wing political establishment. And also in Slovenia, the movement is called Za otroke gre, which means children are at stake. So the children are very much in the focus of what they are saying. And then you have this migrant crisis. And then you have, like now, children in Gaza, and they are totally silent. So then, you know, then people or public commentators say, where are these people who claim that children are at stake? Why aren't they reacting now? Isn't this just then, you know, a fake slogan which they are using? So through this kind of, I don't know if these are mistakes or whatever, I think that the anti-gender potential was kind of reducing itself, or people, you know, believe less and less in what they are saying. Or maybe I'm too optimistic. That could also be the case.
But maybe we need a little bit of optimism these days.
Indeed. Well, this idea that resistance is stimulated by these kinds of actions is, I think, an optimistic thing. Sorry, Dorottya, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to join in exactly with this idea. We found in our research about civil society organizations, and this gives us slight optimism, is that exactly because of the government's anti-gender agenda, some actors, some even non-civil society actors that were previously neutral, like businesses, joined in to feminist organizations. I'm not sure whether that happened to lesbian or other LGBTQ organizations in Hungary specifically, but we know instances of attacked organizations and individuals who were attacked by the government. They received support. They were surprised about receiving support from, for instance, environmentalist organizations or from businesses who were previously they didn't even know what was gender or gender equality or LGBTQ movement or whatever. So that was like a surprising thing to experience. And another issue was because the funding was nearly banned of these organizations, I mean the left-wing ones and the feminist organizations, they couldn't do these EU and other bigger projects that they used to do. So some of them nearly ceased to exist, but others started to go, I would say, back to grassroots. So they and also go outside of Budapest, which was something they did not do previously, to go to the countryside, work among impoverished or Roma women, as the only way they could still be civil and do some civil society activism, because they don't have the resources to do anything more, large scale or policy oriented or anything like that.
That's, if I can, that's really interesting. Dori, tell me if I'm wrong, but it has been sort of in the last 10 years that more now, okay, so more or less since the very late 2000s, that, or even 2012, so maybe it is closer to 10 years, that corporate presence at, say, Budapest Pride has started to become a big thing. And it's roughly in the same period, again, tell me if it was earlier than this, but that there's been much more emphasis, I think, on the part of the LGBTQ organizations to go out to the countryside, to encourage activism in social groups and communities there, which wasn't so much happening before. And I mean, I think that it is part of a similar response, perhaps. Thinking about, like, how do we deal with, Roman, your point about, good things can come out of bad things. Resistance is a response to repression. We should also think, well, what kind of resistance is it? In what directions does it go? Because what we can see here perhaps is, well, there's resistance and there's new possibilities, but they're of a particular kind, perhaps, and not of another kind, right? I mean, I think it's a different direction both of these examples suggest than it might otherwise have been. And maybe that's better, but it's definitely different, right? So there's the trajectories change, is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, it's true what you're saying about the increased corporate presence, but corporate presence is, of course, not unproblematic. And I know that Budapest Pride, the organizer of Budapest Pride, they have had a lot of problems with the degree of corporate presence at the Pride and how they are trying to dominate the whole, scene of the Pride. So quite recently, maybe last year, they banned some really big corporations from the Pride because they were, overruling. They were having these very loud trucks, which, like, kind of muted everyone else around. They want more presence of organizations and civic initiations, and not corporations who are there for, because this is also part of the culture that corporations are presenting themselves as diverse employers, LGBT supporters, but we have to be very critical about this, because we saw that during Budapest Pride, for example, they are there and they are just advertising themselves, and that's not what we want in such a political situation where a pride is a protest, and there are political messages, and these corporations don't strengthen these political messages with their presence. And so this is something that we also have to deal with, like how, and what kind of support to accept, and how to include, because this whole growth of the organizations, which I was mentioning before, is a very neoliberal thing, and the growth, the professionalization of the organizations is a good thing on the one hand, but also, if not carefully reflected, and I don't think this careful reflection is happening in the movement yet, it can become very problematic, and I already see it in our own organization. We experience this growth as an externally imposed growth, which gives us a lot more money, a lot more. Now we can employ people, how wonderful, but there's so much more work that we must employ people, otherwise, so it's procedure that is, yeah, we don't know where it will end yet, but something really, really difficult, and I'm not sure that this is a good direction, but there doesn't seem to be any other available direction at the moment, because, as I said, political lobbying doesn't work, opposition doesn't exist practically as a kind of acting force. There's so much more work to be done because of all the violations of human rights and dignity and so on. There's so much more things to fight against. So the everyday propaganda requires constant responses and so on and so on. So this anti-LGBT movement puts the LGBT organizations into I think very narrow like channels, which might look good. Oh, they are actually getting much stronger. Wow, so that's resistance, and that's. But at the same time, I'm not sure how. Yeah.
I'm really wondering if somebody in Slovenia, in Hungary, in Poland, elsewhere, is saying the same thing about this kind of transnational gender ideology movement, and saying, oh God, it's great to have the support and these models, but they're really pushing us to be anti this or anti that, and to do it in these ways, when what we want to do is be doing this. And I just wonder what the kind of mirror discourse there might be, and how we would find that out. I think that's a really interesting question.